ever since interviewing Michael last year, I've had that feeling in the pit of my stomach that I needed to do something specific to take advantage of what I learned from Michael and provide you with the best advice possible so that you can get your rifle shooting well as quickly as possible and get into competition, because competing at a high level is a great deal of fun, and I want that for you. Hey, before we get too far, I want to thank the patrons over on Patreon. Without them, this would not be possible. Their generosity makes all of these videos possible for you to see for free on YouTube. You've probably noticed that there's no YouTube ads on this video. The reason for that is pretty simple. I find the current YouTube ads to be obnoxious. The system doesn't allow me any control, and honestly, I don't want to expose you to that. So we're going ad-free for now. I'm courting some sponsors to see if we can't get someone that wants to advertise on my videos that would be appropriate for the audience. Until then, we're going to rely on the generosity of the patrons. Once again, thank you, patrons. You can help me out with finding that sponsor by liking and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. All right, back to the video. So today we're going to engage in a grand experiment. That is, an experiment to see if we can develop a way to determine what does and does not make a difference in our shooting so that we can spend the time on the things that do make a difference and not waste the time, components, and barrel life on those things that don't. So guys, today we're going to test whether seating depth makes a difference or not in my .284 Winchester. Since I already believe that seating depth is something of value, this is a great opportunity to not prove that, but test my test, because there's more than just seating depth to consider. There's lots of things that involve these little cartridges that could make a difference in your shooting, in your grouping, and in your score when you're shooting in competition. The case itself, primers, seating depth, neck tension, neck lubrication, sizing processes, heck, things as simple as whether your tuner does anything or not, could be tested with this methodology. That's my hope. But we have to prove the test first to make sure that the test works before we can prove anything else. In other words, we need to figure out if we can achieve statistical significance with this testing methodology. I already believe that seating depth makes a valuable difference in my shooting. I've seen too much anecdotal evidence that it does. I've put up videos before that show what difference it makes when you get the seating depth right, even at 600 yards. Testing methodologies come and go, and honestly, the vast majority of them are frivolous garbage. Let's be really honest about sample sizes. Even the sample size that I use for seating depth is nothing more than a good way to estimate approximately where you should be so that you can fine-tune it later in long-range competition to get the very best out of your rifle. It's never a said-and-done thing when you do a 3-shot group test. How much more can we achieve if we do larger samples? Well, at a certain point, you wear out a barrel testing to see what works best, and that doesn't work for you. So instead, we need to find ways to make the very few shots that we do fire in testing worth more to us. And that's the whole intent here. I've wondered if there was a way to achieve statistical significance with less total shots. In other words, can I get to the point where I can say yes or no, it does or does not make a difference to do a certain thing, so that I can choose those things that are most important to me in my context for my shooting. The results of the testing shown in this video is only really applicable to my rifle with the 180 grain Berger hybrid bullet out of my .284 Winchester. Any other rifle combination may not be the same. Any other bullet may not be the same. What I'm trying to show is that there are ways to find out what is best and what is worst, or better yet, what is the best guess for your load when you start shooting in competition before you get a chance to fine-tune it over time by seeing how it performs on target. Because the best shooters, the best competitors, especially in F-class and bench rest, are tuning continuously. They don't just pick a load and then go with that for the entire barrel. If it isn't performing up to what they think is appropriate, they start varying a little bit, back and forth, looking for that right spot, as you've seen me do in previous videos. Which brings me to the subject of what I'm trying to prove. You know, people that make things, not speaking specifically of this manufacturer, tend to want to prove that their product makes a difference. Well, I'm kind of outside of that context. Instead of proving that a seating die with a micrometer on top of it is something you absolutely need, I'm trying to determine whether I need to worry quite so much about what the setting is here, or if I can do my seating depth testing in much bigger increments to save more ammunition, or if I need to do it at all. That's the question at hand here. Anybody that does science trying to prove something Specifically, a specific outcome is not a scientist at all. And I want to get away from that in our shooting community. Guessing doesn't do us any good as a shooting community. Instead, we want good science, real science that was done as blindly as possible to just see what happens so that we can actually learn from it. Instead of trying to prove whether this works or that works, instead, go see what it does when we make changes to it. The rifle for this test will be my .284 Winchester F open rifle. This is a Krieger 1 9 twist 4-groove barrel that I have been using for some time and has 850 rounds on it. That's mated to a Golden Bear action from Kelbley's and an X-ring stock. This is the Hendrix taper stock that I have been shooting for a little while and has been absolutely a game changer for me. On top is a Night Force Competition 15-55 with a DDR2 reticle in it. All in all, a pretty standard F-open rifle. And that's what we need, a competition rifle to do this test with. Because doing it in some laboratory somewhere is great for determining if seating depth makes a difference or not, but I'm trying to figure out if you can do it on your range with your rifle. So before we start trying to determine whether one seating depth is better than another or if seating depth makes any difference at all, we have to do the underlying test to determine which seating depths to try to use. I picked 3 loads from my seating depth test. The best seating depth based on group size alone, the worst one based on group size alone, and then a mediocre one that I chose randomly from the remaining loads. The reason for a mediocre one is to have a control, something in the middle so that I can tell if things are flip-flopping as I do my results analysis. It is simply there for my edification, not necessarily part of the underlying test protocol, just enough to make sure that we understand what's really going on and if random chance is kicking our butt. And that's where I ran into the first problem. Now that I have all the loads that I need, I load up 100 rounds of ammo, 33 of each and every load to give me a reasonably large sample size so that I can do an actual test, something that at least feels scientific. I was trying to find an opportunity to get these rounds fired downrange. I was planning to do this at 600 yards so I'd have bigger distances between the shots so that the mean radius would be a little easier to calculate and so that I could lazily take the data directly out of my shot marker to do the analysis with. The wind, the rain, the mirage, and range availability all conspired to make that impossible for this particular test. I had to shorten up the range from 600 yards to 100 yards, so I couldn't be lazy with a shot marker anymore, and in order to do that, I had to create my own target. So I created the 15 square target for this particular test. I use squares because the corners of squares are very easy to aim at very precisely and get consistent shots off. The white area in the middle is where I intended to land the shots, so it's up half a minute and right half a minute from where I was aiming. And it also gives me a place to measure from for the center of each and every shot. Because remember, I'm going to do mean radius, which means I need an absolute position for each and every shot fired. If you want this target, it's available for free on my Patreon website. The link's in the description. The shooting process was actually quite simple. I started with 5 sighters just to make sure that I had the barrel warmed up. I then shot my first 15-shot target. All of these shots are done round robin. Load 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I vary that order to make sure that we don't get an order effect out of this. As a matter of fact, every possible order was encountered during this test because there's only 6 possible orders for 3 loads. In addition, we repeated the 1, 2, 3 at the end for a 3-shot of each of the loads to make that last 3 rounds for each one. 33 shots of each and every load went into the target, and now we just have to do analysis. And that takes some time because we're measuring the absolute position of each and every shot, and that's the whole reason that we're using a square for a target. It gives me references to measure from, so that I can get those absolute positions as accurately as possible. Now, the targets were also mounted on cardboard so I could plug the holes to make sure that I had the bullet position absolutely as correct as possible when I measured it. All the raw data from this test is available for free on my Patreon website. There's a link in the description to that as well. If you want to take that data and go torture it any way you see fit, please feel free. It's no harm to me. I'm not trying to prove anything, and if you can find something of interest in that data, please take advantage of it. Let's take a look at my analysis. I analyzed this data in a variety of ways. The first is mean radius. Then I analyzed 5-shot group size. Then I analyzed the average 5-shot group size. And last but not least, the 33-shot group size, so that we could get a span of understanding of what's going on with each and every one of these seating depths. Let's start with mean radius. Mean radius can be done 2 different ways. I want to be very clear about this. When you're doing multiple targets and doing mean radius, you need to determine whether you're going to use the group center for each individual target and then combine the radii measurements together into a mean, or if you are going to find the group center for the entire series and calculate the mean from that. The difference is about 20 thousandths of an inch in mean radius. It's not a huge amount. Considering we were shooting 100 yards, it should not be very big anyway. But it doesn't really make any difference in our outcome. In this situation, load number 1, our best load, was best by a little bit. In second place was load number 2, and in third place was load number 3, our worst load. In other words, they stayed in perfect order the way we had them figured out from our original test. But before you go running off, clicking away and saying, see, it was pretty easy, it wasn't that easy. This standard deviation is far too large. As a matter of fact, the probability is so low that we cannot assign any level of statistical significance to this at all. As a matter of fact, we are closer to proving that they are the same than we are to proving that they are in fact different. So we can't say we've done science and proven that this, in fact, makes a difference. So let's move on to the next metric that we want to use, and that is the 5-shot groups. Now, for 5-shot groups, we have an interesting outcome here. With the 6 5-shot groups and 1 3-shot group, we had a situation where load number 1, our best load, came out on top 4 out of 7 times. Load number 2 came out on top once, and load number 3 came out on top 2 times, even being our worst load. So we see this pattern where load number 2 actually was in last place far too frequently to be a mistake. It was in last place more often than load number 1 was in first, but load number 1 was either first or second on every single trial, which is quite interesting. It never ended up in last place. Might be luck, might be coincidence, but it is kind of suggestive, if you ask me. Let's take a look at the average group size for all 7 of these groups. Average group size, once again, load number 1, our best load, is the winner by a little bit. Load number 3 was in second place, and load number 2 was about 5 thousandths larger. For overall group size, the slight difference in group size is not real telling. It just tells me that both load 2 and load 3 are performing about equally, and load 1 was performing about 10% better. Looking at those statistics, once again, we have not achieved statistical significance. There's simply not enough data there to do that. And the difference is not large enough with a standard deviation that is, once again, quite large. So let's take a look at the 33-shot group. When we start looking at the 33-shot group, we get a shocker. Load number 3, our worst load, was absolute best by 100 thousandths of an inch over load number 1, which was our best coming into this. And load number 2 was in the middle, which makes me question something. If load number 1 shoots the smallest groups typically and has the smallest average group size, how does it have the largest 33-shot group? I had to do a little head scratching and started looking at the numbers quite closely. The group center for load 1 was moving around far more than loads 2 and 3 were, which tells me something about the point of impact stability of load number 1. It's not there. So load number 1 may shoot the smallest groups, but it's probably also going to shoot the smallest scores if you're shooting a score game like F-class. In other words, it's going to walk around the target as the conditions change a little more, it appears, than what loads 2 or 3 are. For transparency, my tuned load for this barrel was load number 3. In other words, that's when I was shooting in competition. That's what I believed shot best in my rifle, over 20-shot strings. And this bears out that maybe I wasn't too far off base with that. But there's a lot more to learn. This is just a suggestive result. Now, I wondered if maybe a flyer or 2 had caused that difference in group size. So I went through and I extracted the 3 worst shots from each of the 33-shot groups, making them 30-shot groups. This is far too many to remove for removing outliers. I wanted to do a big amount, 10%, just to see what would happen. Sure enough, the order remained the same. Load 3 was the smallest, load 2 was in the middle, and load 1 was the biggest. So I decided to plot the individual groups, and here they are. Load 1 obviously had some shots that wanted to trail out to the left. Now, looking at those shots, I color-coded them by individual targets, and those 4 shots that are out to the left were from 3 different groups, as you can see. Load number 2 tended to be wider than it was tall by just a little bit, and load number 3 was tall but very narrow. In other words, it acted completely opposite of what the initial load development target looks like, this one, which would suggest that it would be very flat and wide. But it did the exact opposite when we tested it again for 33 shots. Now you're probably asking yourself, did Keith check his 3-shot groups before he did this? Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I shot additional groups for load 1 and the load that is adjacent to load 1, which was actually slightly smaller, for the purpose of validating that they were in fact shooting small. They shot consistent group sizes in the high ones. So we had a test that looked valid when we shot it at 100 yards over 6 shots, and still it looks like we did not pick a winner. So there's something more to tuning than what we understand at this point. I'm not going to theorize as to what that is, but what I do know is the group center was moving around on load number 1 far more than loads 2 or 3. So guys, in the end, I don't have any answers. I don't have statistical significance to pronounce a winner. This is the way to do it. Instead, I have generated more questions than answers. Questions that you will need to answer for yourself for your rifle as you are doing your testing. And something to be aware of, that when you do a seating depth test or a powder test, if the rifle doesn't perform up to your expectations, when you get out to shooting at a competition or out to distance, don't be afraid to start moving things around until it does shoot good at distance, because we all know that we can make them shoot better at longer ranges by getting the load right. It's just a matter of what is it that we're missing when we're doing our initial load development. All right, guys, that's all I have for this one. Questions, but not answers. I wish I had something better for you. Until next time, shoot straight, don't spare the components, do some testing. I'll see you in the next video.